Okay, so today we're going to be talking about antinatalism, immoral or slash immoral births, and selective abortion, which they're like loosely related. I guess antinatalism is just like a little concept I wanted to introduce in case you guys don't know of it. Okay, so I think everybody here knows each other, right? Yes. Okay,
Yes.
so I guess we can
Yeah.
do the intros, but we can do. What's your favorite holiday, everybody?
Halloween, 100%.
Why?
I don't know. Christmas has just not like hasn't been hitting recently.
Mm,
Like Halloween, I don't know. It's just fantastic.
I feel like Halloween doesn't hit either anymore. I just don't feel anything ever.
I don't think that has something related to the holidays. That's concerning.
Everything I say, I'm just trying to have. Okay, okay. I was also gonna say that my favorite holiday is Halloween, but I also feel like I don't know, nothing is as fun as it used to be when I was little. Stop.
I think even with the pandemic, like mine would probably still be Christmas just because it's cold and people's houses are all decorated. Um, I guess that's true of Halloween too, but like, it's brighter.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. The houses in my neighborhood look so cute right now.
Hmm.
People that put up blue Christmas lights.
Yeah, my neighborhood usually looks pretty depressing, but my neighbors are really like stepping up their game.
Neighborhood is so depressing for Halloween.
Oof.
There are like 5 houses with their lights on.
I was also going to say Christmas for the same reasons that people like Halloween. Nothing hits anymore. I just have more of an excuse to like bully myself into being spirited.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Jane, can you just leave if you're gonna laugh at everything? Okay, anyone else? Teddy, what's your favorite holiday?
I also like Christmas
Why?
because I feel like it's the biggest break. Like you get Christmas break, but then every other holiday is just like a day or two off.
Maybe I take back Halloween. That was a good point because you don't even get a day off for that.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. That's so rude. Who are they to decide which holiday counts?
Who do you mean when you say they?
Oh, the education system.
Okay, okay. Jefferson, what's your favorite holiday?
Christmas, long break, same reason.
Okay.
Everyone's copying me.
What?
I
What
like
are
it because of Santa, actually.
they?
He comes visit me every year, and I rub my face on his plump belly. And it's so comforting.
Then he just steals your cookies, man.
Dude, I gladly give Santa my cookies and my milk too.
Okay. Chen, what's your favorite holiday?
Actually, I would say for this year, only I mean, I think it's November 1st. That day has one, that day earns me 1 hour of extra sleep.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
But
that's a good answer. All right, so the big questions we're gonna try to answer today are there cases in which procreating is morally wrong and is selective abortion wrong? So selective abortion is just the idea that you can have abortions or like you should have abortions in certain cases. So like if you know the baby has like a disability, for example, that's like usually the case why people um, engage in selective abortion. So Some people think it's a bad idea, but we'll get into why later. So, what do you guys think about these questions before we have a discussion about them?
I think that procreating is morally wrong if you know for sure you're going to like pass on something that will make your child's life miserable
Mm-hmm.
or like not as not as good as most, not equal to the potential that other children have when they're born.
I would also say that if you knew that you would be raising your kid in like a less than ideal situation, like some sort of financial or like home circumstances where you knew the kid wouldn't be safe, then that's wrong.
I guess that kind of like raises the question though. I can't really tell what is like a sufficiently bad condition to prohibit. Like I can't tell when it turns from just like, oh, a bit disadvantageous to being morally wrong. I
Yeah.
don't think you should like, if you knew your kid was gonna be blind, I don't think that's like morally wrong. Um, I guess that's like saying some disabilities are worse than other disabilities.
Yeah. It's hard to like with most philosophy, it's hard to like come up with an actual line to draw. So like antinatalism, like I was talking about before, is pretty much saying that all cases of procreating are immoral. So like it says on the slide, it's assigning a negative value to birth. So like because like bringing all any life into the world is morally wrong. And why do you guys think that people might think this?
Is it like an environmental thing, maybe?
Okay, that's a good point. I don't think that's the logic that most antinatalists go by, but like that is a good consideration.
They just think that like life is like pain and suffering. So by like bringing someone into the world who like didn't ask to be brought into the world, you're like forcing them to endure the like pain and suffering of life without them having a say in it.
Yeah, exactly. So like Tia was talking about before, it's always or not, I don't want to say always, but some people might think that it's morally wrong to bring someone into life if you know that they'll have a disability, but like and the reasoning behind that is because they'll like have to endure a lot of suffering, but these people might also claim that all life is pretty much suffering anyway, so why would it be okay to bring life into the world? So can anyone counter that argument? I feel like it's a pretty extreme point of view to take. So
Just like from a utilitarian standpoint, just as there's like suffering in the world, there's also a lot of like happiness and pleasure to be derived from being alive. So it's like for the specific individual, it kind of just, it's a matter of chance whether they actually have it worse off than if they had never existed, or they have it better off than if they had never existed. So like, I don't know. Also, like if we're just framing it in the nature of like all life is suffering, therefore we should just not bring more beings into existence. I don't know. It just sounds like there's something missing from that like the premise and the conclusion.
I think what they're claiming is more like um not like being a conscious being in the first place. If we like label that as like zero value, then being alive is like negative. So even if there are like pleasures and joys in being alive, like ultimately in the end it like adds up to being something negative. So by bringing something into life, then you are doing something with negative value in total. Which I guess a good way to counter that would just be say, well, being alive isn't negative value because of XYZ.
If we go from the argument that everyone should like fully develop their talents because it's a benefit to the whole world, then I guess you could kind of further that and say like people should be born because they have goods they can add to the world.
So like their contribution to society.
Yep.
Actually, I'm just thinking about a theory proposed by Malthus that you don't know like if you give birth to another individual, whether it would be like a contribution to society. I mean, because you don't know like what is that pleasure that actually. So actually, divide. Sorry, I don't know how the word is. It's like sometimes if you give birth to an additional being, it can be contributive, but sometimes if you give birth to one more, it might be seen as a burden given the current social capacity. So it's kind of, I hold a nihilistic attitude toward that. You don't know what that capacity is. You will never know. So we need to rationalize it from other.
Yeah, because it's almost like equally likely that you'll give birth to someone that's like that doesn't contribute much or maybe takes away from society, right? So because we can't control or like predict for what will happen in the future, I guess maybe that's a hard way to determine whether or not. Um, so with selective abortion, I think people mentioned stuff already, but can people just call out some examples of cases in which you would think procreating would be morally wrong? So I think Tia mentioned blindness before, and you said that you wouldn't think of it as morally wrong, right?
I said like it depends. I don't know if blindness is a good example, but like there I don't think all disabilities are equally like
Yeah.
debilitating. Yeah.
I think though, for me, I kind of feel like blindness would count as something morally wrong just because like our society doesn't really have enough resources for it to be like that easy to be a blind person.
Do you think deafness carries the same
Yeah, if not more,
difficulty?
it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to be deaf than blind. But then again, like just because the baby is going to be difficult doesn't necessarily mean that it's morally wrong.
There's also like that argument that there's like the deaf community
Mm-hmm.
does not really regard it as like it kind of just like yeah, like a community exists of deaf individuals who just like um really want deaf children to learn sign language to be like to socialize with other deaf individuals, things like that. Would that like they would not consider it um really a disability at all. If anything, they would like want to bring more deaf children into the world. So is it like depending on which society you live in?
I guess like how a society defines like what illness is might play into a role. Like if we imagine a society where it's like super easy to be a deaf person, then like of course it's like okay. Like color blindness, for example, like nothing really in life is hard to do if you're a colorblind person, so it wouldn't really count, I guess, but like in theory, if we were like super good at accommodating for everybody, then like there would be no necessity for selective abortion, right? Like if everybody was accepting of everyone and we had like resources for everybody, then it wouldn't matter at all. But where we are right now, it's like super hard for people who have like
I think
Down.
I disagree with that because even if you have like resources to help like disabled people, like
Mhm.
I think their quality of life will still like generally be worse.
So then would you draw the conclusion then that it would still be morally wrong?
I think it depends on like the severity of the disability.
So you think it's like completely independent of like what resources are available for them?
Not like completely independent, but I don't think you can solve all the problems of a disability with like resources.
Mm. I think though, okay, let me rephrase. Maybe like not you can't solve all the problems, but you can solve them to the point where it wouldn't be bad enough to claim that bringing those people into life would be morally wrong. Does that make sense? Like you're making it easy enough for them to live so that like a bad thing.
Mm, maybe it like depends pretty significantly on like the severity of the disability and like the quality of the resources though.
But like I was just talking about like a perfect scenario where like we could come up with like just the best way. Like that was just theoretical. I don't actually think it's like possible to get to that point, but
Like if we had mm, maybe
like if we could imagine a society where like nobody treated people differently based on like what disability they had and they also had all the resources they needed to do like normal life things, then I don't think that it would be morally wrong to bring disabled people to into life, right?
like a person with Down syndrome, even if they're not like treated differently and they have like really great resources, like they're never going to have the same brain functions as someone without Down syndrome.
Right, but their perceived quality of life will not be bad in any way, right? So like does it really matter what we think their quality of life is?
Wait, are you saying like they won't know that they could have a better quality of life, so it shouldn't matter to them?
Maybe. I'm just trying to think like if they don't like experience anything bad because of their disease, then I don't really see how it would be a problem. Maybe.
But what about like a blind person who doesn't know what it's like to like be able to see?
Right. So they don't know, but they also can like imagine and in the society that someone like in someone in the US if they are born blind, it's like super hard to live as a blind person because you can like tell that you are missing out on something, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if we, I don't know.
interesting
Yeah.
thing to think about.
And then there are also people who say like it doesn't even have to be a disability. If it's anything that you know will detract possibly from the quality of life of the child, then it's immoral to procreate. Like I remember in a philosophy course I take, there was an author who argued that um, having like doing gamete donation to have a child, like just going to a sperm bank or something, is morally wrong because you are depriving that child of one parent. So,
Okay.
like a connection that is supposedly like essential to them developing
Yeah.
better than their counterpart or than their peers.
Wait, who was that?
Mm, I gotta find the author's name, but
Yeah, it's not important.
Mhm.
I vaguely remember that also from bioethics. Like, there are also, you can come up with a bunch of things that would be depriving a child of a lot of stuff. And like most people alive live with something that someone might consider something like a child shouldn't have to go through, right? So I think Jesse mentioned it before, like if you don't have like the financial resources to have a child also, like one could consider that wrong too. Does anyone think so?
I have another hot take that's not related.
Yes.
This is something that people have disagreed with me on, and it's fine. On the topic of things that could detract from a child's life, I think it is and could be immoral to have kids right now and in the future, like for our generation and going forward, because realistically, I mean, we're not going to have a planet, like a very healthy planet. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's okay to have children and subject them to a dying earth.
Yeah, okay, that's a really good point. I think a lot of why people might disagree with you is like how much of a problem they see climate change as, right? Um, but I would think yes.
I agree.
Jane agrees. Tell
I
her what you
agree.
think. Is that all you're gonna say?
Well, she said most of it
Okay.
very well.
Does anyone disagree with Jesse?
I think I agree that like it's I definitely agree that it could be considered like immoral, but I feel like another reason why people would disagree is just the possibility of it changing. But I guess there's always or like most of the time there's a possibility of something changing, but from the way it looks, it seems as if like climate change is like inevitable. Um and it can be stopped, but it doesn't look like it's going to be stopped anytime soon. So I would say I agree.
Can it be stopped?
I mean, if we try super hard, I think there's still hope. But that's a different discussion. I feel like another thing people might disagree with is like people love their freedom. So like no one wants to hear like, oh, you can't have a child because of these reasons. Like, and I think it's true, like even in the hardest times of any part of humanity, like there have always been more kids to be had, right? So I feel like I don't know. It might seem I don't know if it's like would you maybe consider it morally acceptable in some cases or cuz I can't tell how morally wrong it is.
That's a good question. I don't know either.
Yeah.
I just would consider it extremely inconsiderate to have a kid right now or ever in the future.
It's also like um some people just like want to have kids and that is like a higher priority than like the actual lives their kids might have, right? They just like the idea of having children.
Yeah, because I guess I agree with like the fact that like we didn't ask to be born in like the current state that we are, and like there are gonna be people in our generation who are like who are most likely to be victims of climate change in like generations after us. Like there are people who still want to have kids because it's our right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like weird to just be like, oh wait, well you can't because you're born in on the state. So yeah, I do think freedom is like a big part of if it's moral.
Yeah. But then again, you can say that people have the freedom to do immoral things, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's hard because sometimes or not sometimes, a lot of the time, freedom will come before morality, especially since like there's no like ethics police, right?
Yeah, and it's like we still do a lot of things legally that are like pretty immoral. But
Yeah,
yeah.
like we say this all the time. The law is not like actually a good reflection of what morals should be, or like I know every time I mention this topic, I'm always like, but should the law be a good reflection of morality? Or like, how do we? I think someone had suggested a topic for us to talk about like whether or not universal morals can exist. I forget who that was, but I think that's a super cool topic too. So, on the topic of selective abortion, though, a lot of people will disagree with this practice because, like, it expresses the idea that disabled people live, like, less valuable lives. So, like, if you say people with condition C are less valuable, or like, if you have an abortion because of the fact that your fetus has condition C, then aren't you sending the message that people with condition C have lives that are like less worth living? And I feel like that's kind of a icky thing to say, unless you think it's not. What do you guys think?
Like, are you talking about disabled like people having children that they know are going to be disabled?
So like some parents will choose to have an abortion if they find out that their kid has like Down syndrome, for example, and
Mhm.
people can argue then that when people do that, it like implies that people with Down syndrome have like lives that are less worth living slash less valuable. And I guess I'm just asking, like, do you think that selective abortion sends that kind of message or no?
Well, the thing with Down syndrome, um, it shortens your lifespan significantly, and gen like I would need to do research on this to find out like what exactly Down syndrome, like how it affects a person. But I feel like with it depends on maybe the thing that the child's going to be born with, because like having a selective abortion with a child who's going to be born with asthma versus a child born with cystic fibrosis, like there's a big difference in morality there. So like I feel like it's just how badly it would affect them.
Right. So let's say though that there is a child with, or like you abort a child that will have cystic fibrosis. I don't know if you can predict for that at all, but like by getting the abortion though, aren't you like implying that people with cystic fibrosis have lives that are less worth living?
Well, I feel like that one would kind of be moral because um well, the thing about it is it is predictable, but I'm not sure because it happens when two parents carry the same gene and like their child would be born with it. I'm not sure if it's 100% of the time,
Yeah.
but let's say that it is completely predictable. I feel like it would be because the people who already have the disease, they like need lung transplants and things like that, and they like the lifespan is like I think like 20 to 30 years old, which isn't very much at all. And like they would need to spend a huge portion of their lives in like hospitals and whatever. So I feel like it would be moral.
Wait, so do you think it sends a negative message or no, though? Or do you think, like, even if it does send a negative message, like, sometimes it's better to just have the abortion than to not?
I don't know. That's difficult because I feel like it does saying like their like what you said like their lives aren't worth living or like yeah, but I feel like I don't know. It's very confusing.
I I tend to believe that this message always exists. I mean, especially as abortion are becoming more and more legal right now. If I mean I haven't seen any statistics, but I definitely believe that if you summarize the stats, it definitely indicate that parents are more likely to opt to abortion when they found their kid has some initial disabilities. So this message will always exist, but the problem, but but the problem here is how do you interpret this message? And I mean, for especially for those individuals with those initial disabilities, how to educate them to like to overcome this self-depreciation or whatever. I think that that's the key point because I don't think like this from a macro point. I mean, collectively, I don't think you can make a lot of change on whether people, I mean, when people would opt when people would opt abortion. So
Yeah, I'm not like saying that we shouldn't allow people to do this or like if we should like put any legislature towards doing whatever, but like I'm just saying that like maybe it is ethically like iffy because of the fact that you're um or like parents are because of the fact that parents are more willing to get the abortion if they know that their child has some condition. So like um I forgot what I was going to say. I think though like what Yara was saying, I also think it does send a message that is bad, and I also think I remember in my class we talked about how people with these conditions also like disagree about whether or not they would abort a child with the condition that they have. So it's like very much a gray area.
I think the last bullet point, the parents not prepared to care for a child with disability matters too. I don't know what kind of message I think it sends. I think it is somewhat negative, but I think it also sends another message that says that um, a life with a disability, like you have to be more careful. It requires more caution. Um, and again, like I said, before, I think it would be a little bit immoral if you could not provide the best life possible for your child, given like all of their circumstances. So it might be a better option to abort if they can't adequately care for someone with a disability.
Yeah, I agree. I think like even if we do accept that it sends a bad message, like you can't deny that in some cases like you're doing something more ethically correct by getting the abortion than not doing so. So like in the same realm, a lot of people argue that by allowing selective abortion to like continue to happen, we're like perpetuating the discrimination that already exists against people with certain conditions. So like because this practice exists in the first place, we're kind of allowing for people with certain disabilities to be treated like second class citizens. So like in terms of a social justice standpoint, it kind of seems a little bit of a bad thing to do. I don't know how much you guys agree with this though.
I think it's kind of just like some kind of cycle, because I don't think it's selective abortion that is perpetuating discrimination, but discrimination that is motivating people to selectively abort people with disabilities. Like, if this discrimination did not exist, people would not feel that their child had less prospects for a successful life. So like,
Yeah.
I I think this kind of objection is just getting things the wrong way around.
I also think though, like I agree with you, but I also think that like it also feeds on itself like in the end though, that like even though it started with the discrimination in the first place, like by continuing to do selective abortion, it just like keeps solidifying the discrimination. So like a lot of the like there are tons of practices that will feed into the discrimination obviously, but like this would be one of the causes. So another important part of this to think about is like how much is selective abortion like eugenics? Because it seems like people can argue that selective abortions are just like another way we can enhance the population slash enhance our individual children. So some people are opposed to it because it seems like reprogenetics is something that we shouldn't go through with, because then it just leads to a slippery slope of what is bad enough or what is good enough.
I guess it like feels different than eugenics because like we're mostly talking about like serious health concerns or like things that will like significantly negatively impact someone's life. But like you said, I don't really know where to like draw the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Teddy. Like, I feel like though the outcome might end up being somewhat similar, it just feels different because the intention is like completely different. You're
Right.
not really striving to make, I don't know, it's not so much like, oh, I want to make the perfect child. It's like, I want, I don't want my child to have like a lot of disadvantages in life or sufficient disadvantages in life.
Yeah.
But as for like the outcome, I can't really tell how different that would be.
Yeah. And I think it's like also a question as to like how important is our intention when the final outcome is going to be similar to what eugenics would produce.
I can say it's like an equally bad outcome, but somehow comes from better intention.
Yeah. It's hard. I still can't tell whether intentions are more important or outcomes are more important, just like in a broad sense. It's very confusing. So, like, in case anyone does hold that view, though, like, a good counter argument is that, like, parents are always looking for ways to, like, enhance their children all the time. Like, there are always, like, pregnant mothers that, like, play classical music to when they're pregnant or whatever, so that their babies will be smarter or become musical geniuses or whatever. So, like, people can claim that education and just like raising a child in general is like also a method of enhancing them. So, like, how is it, or like, how do you guys think it's different, or is it different? Like, how is education different from like selectively aborting children? Besides like the intention part that we talked about already.
I don't know. Education doesn't feel like fundamentally changing a person.
But
Like,
early education in a way is, right?
yeah, but like I get what you're saying, but it's kind of, I don't know. It's kind of, even though I recognize the thing I'm comparing it to as irrational, I feel like it's kind of the same with like GMOs versus just like choosing to plant the best, like choosing to replant the best crop you get.
Yeah. So like in a way it's like the same practice but in different forms.
Yeah, it feels like it's more involved in one than the other. But
Yeah. But
that
you
might be the wrong way to put it.
for like GMOs versus selective planting.
It's hard to say. I don't know. Like, education does improve the child, I guess, or makes it a more functional member of society. But I think it doesn't, like, I don't know. I don't think education has that transformative of an effect.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from. It's just like, how transformative does it have to be for it to be like something that we should consider as eugenics essentially, you know? Like, even if we could just like select genes for our babies, like, who is to say that that is different from, that is like actually fundamentally different from the practices that we already condone? Any ideas? So, like, taking the flip side, though, a lot of people can claim that you actually have a moral obligation to selectively abort your kids. I think we were talking about before, like, if a child has, like, something extremely debilitating, we would think, like, why would you not prevent that suffering, right? But then the counter argument for that is like what we were just talking about, like, how is this not just old eugenics in disguise? Like, why are we more willing to accept this?
I believe not, probably another argument to make is, I mean, if you are referring to your genetics, it's actually a very broad practice. And I mean, if you look at how people practice eugenics in the past, it's like judge people based on their color and something that has no scientific base and something that has no scientific base. And sometimes people just, you know, as far as I know, like for example, in last centuries, the psychiatrists tend to classify all kinds of phenomena as abnormal, and that somehow discriminates certain people of certain ethnic groups. That's what happens in the past. But right now, as the science improves, you know that, for example, if you have certain genetics, sometimes genetic study could help somehow to understand that. Let me see how to say, like the application of the genetic studies are far more precise right now than in the past, and it can be more decisive. Uh, I'm sorry, I need to organize a little bit.
Okay, no problem. I think another place that this comes from is like a lot of the time we see like more high-tech scientific procedures as being like more definitive than things like early education and stuff. But like a lot of the time, like the way a child is raised in its early years is has like an effect that is almost as or as much of an as like has as much of an impact on the child as their genetics do. So I think that's also something to think about.
Does the intention behind our idea of eugenics matter? Like, if we think about eugenics with World War II, it was like entirely race based.
Yeah.
And it didn't really serve a purpose, or at least I cannot think of a conceivable purpose that it served. But with this, like, at least there is some intention with reducing suffering. Does that make a difference at all, or would you say it's the same?
I am not completely sure. Like, even in World War II, I think they also practiced eugenics on people with disabilities, also. So, like, there's also like a historical part to this, right? Because it seems weird to be like carrying out these procedures when we know that historically these groups were victims of eugenics. So I'm not completely sure. I understand where people are coming from when you say that eugenics has like much purer, or not eugenics, or like selective abortion has much purer intentions of like trying to eliminate suffering, but in the end I'm not sure like what effect this is really having on the way we see people with these disabilities.
I also wanted to like bring up um that education has like actually did play a role in furthering eugenics historically.
Mm-hmm.
So like even today, education tends to be about the most like the ideas or practices deemed most useful for the majority of society, which is why like a lot of like students with disabilities or students belonging to certain minorities um, do not perform as well on like standardized tests and things like that because they are not tailored for their knowledge.
Mhm.
So I guess in a sense, um, I don't think it's that different from education because it's still reinforcing like what society wants of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, I have a question for this point. So if there are other findings that suggest that people's well-being generally improve after receiving education, regardless of their race. I mean, even that might improve at a different rate. I mean, it are biased towards certain privileged kids.
Mhm.
If so, if their well-being are gonna improve anyway, do you think education is beneficial?
Wait, I'm not sure I understood the question. Are you asking like
So actually, I think like if people's well-being are gonna improve after education, even though education itself might perpetuate racism, might perpetuate inequality, but the fundamental purpose of education is, if we define the fundamental purpose of education is to improve individuals' well-being,
Mhm.
then education itself is also, I believe, is also a valid tool. And I mean, probably we should think about methodology change to make it less, to make it more equitable or whatever.
Yeah.
But education itself, I still believe in the basic purpose of education and
Yeah, I
it,
definitely agree. It's
and
just that like a lot of the time the system we have set up, like especially with standardized testing, just allows for there to be like more of a gap between like the privileged students and like people with disabilities slash people of certain minorities, which is like a problem that obviously we need to fix, but like that doesn't mean that like the reason why education exists is like completely valid. And like I don't think, I'm not saying that education is like not a good form of enhancement, because like if it's done well then it's like awesome, right? So I think a lot of people accept that idea, which is why I brought it up, because it's confusing to try to discern a difference between like how education enhances people versus how selective abortion might enhance the population. It kind of seems like parents selectively aborting their kids is like done in this with the same intention as education is, which is why it's hard to say that selective abortion is wrong, or that it's like different, or that reprogenetics is different from educating or just like child rearing.
I also think about the point like how selective abortion might be different from eugenetic practice in the past. Like, I mean, in the past when you practice racism, you're actually giving some people benefit at the cost of others.
Mm-hmm.
But for selective abortion, if you know that for the kid that you're giving birth, that his well-being will, like he would rather die than being alive. I mean, from a statistical point, from statistic standpoint, like he's more likely to be willing to die than to stay alive. Then why give birth in the first place? I mean, that doesn't harm anyone else. That doesn't come at the cost of anyone else. But it's just a matter of choice, like to maximum the well-being rather than, you know, weigh and balance.
Right. So like um when you have a selective abortion, like no one is really being harmed, in the sense that like we're not directly saying, oh, certain babies have higher value than others. It's just like the message that it might send is possibly problematic. I really can't tell like how important it is though. Like if we imagine a society where like these people didn't experience any discrimination, like then maybe I would not be opposed to selective abortion, right? I'm not really saying that I am opposed to it though, because like obviously I do believe there are cases where it's more morally right to have the abortion, but I don't know. It's just hard to say like if selective abortion actually does change the way that people see people with disabilities.
When we say like changing the way people see people with disabilities, are we talking about like the knowledge that like we allow selective abortions, or like I guess my question is how would people know that like some people were getting selective abortions and choosing to abort potentially disabled children?
I think a lot of people in society are just like aware of the fact that a lot of parents will get abortions if they know their child has, like my example has been Down syndrome, so let's just go with that. So by allowing or like by this practice like existing in our society, I feel like I'm asking whether or not that practice like results in the general population devaluing and treating people with Down syndrome as like second class citizens. Like I can't really tell how much of that, like Tia was talking about before, I can't tell how much of it is mostly a result of the fact that that discrimination like already exists.
Even if that was true, like, would it necessarily like be a bad thing? Because if you think about like utilitarianism, like they might be treated worse or have like more of a stigma around them, but there would be like less people who we have that stigma towards. So it would ultimately like provide
But then,
more of a benefit to society.
yeah, I see what you're saying. But then, like, this would only result in like there will always be certain parents that won't abort their kids if they have these disabilities, and then in the end those kids and eventually adults will have to face a discrimination that's even worse than what they would have gone through before, right? Cuz like as they become like more of a minority, it'll be more easy for society to like turn their back on them or like see them as like even more of an outlier than we already do.
So do you like not buy into the utilitarian argument then that like that might be acceptable or like even a net benefit to society just because there'd be like less people who are facing that discrimination?
So I don't know because in the end, even if you do accept the utilitarian standpoint, you can argue that like even though it's fewer people, it's like the same amount of pain total because of like how difficult it is for the few people that do have these disabilities. I'm not sure. There's no like actual calculation I can do for this, but like it's hard. Like I do think I personally would have a problem with not selectively aborting a child that I knew had a significant disability. But like it also is upsetting to me that it might upset people that have that condition already and are living with it.
I would argue for an enhanced utilitarian attitude. I mean, probably for a society as a whole, we can set up a bar and to make sure that, and for each individual, it's of their moral obligation before they make the abortion choice that they have to make sure that there are science informed evidence that there is a significant risk. There is a very significant risk for their kids to have a very to have a how to say it? To I'm sorry, I still need to organize it.
That's all good. I think I don't know. It's very confusing because like I obviously don't want to be someone that's like making people with X condition feel bad about living their life. Like obviously nobody wants to devalue the people that already have that condition and like obviously did not ask to be born. But I also like can't not say that it would be morally wrong to, or in some cases it would be morally wrong to not abort them, right?
I feel like the message that you're sending is like not as important as the actual effect that comes of it. Anytime you find a cure for an illness, you're kind of implying that, okay, this is something that we should try to eliminate. So it's like, I think from that standpoint, like suppose, let's just say cystic fibrosis, because Yara mentioned that before, like if somehow doctors were able to find a cure for that and people were suddenly fine, we're not going to be so worried about like for the people who can't get this cure, what will this like say about their condition? Because they know it's not something they want to live with.
Yeah.
I think for the most part.
I think also um aren't there people with like autism that don't like that people are looking for a cure to autism also?
Yeah, but then like, do we consider should we like weigh physical disabilities the same as we would weigh like mental?
I don't know. I think this also comes up in like the next discussion, but like a lot of the time it's like super confusing to me because I do think like um psychological and like psychiatric disabilities should like be treated as seriously as physical ones are, but it's also like the point that I wanted to mention next discussion was like should we allow someone or wait, I don't even know if I was going to talk about it next discussion, but like there are cases where people seek like physician assisted suicide. So like would that be okay for someone with like chronic depression? Like it's very it's I don't know if it is because a lot of people like the intuition might be no, right? Because depression is like not the same as like stage 4 cancer, right? But if you have chronic depression, like that's not just gonna go away. And if that person decides like I don't want to be alive anymore, should they be able to seek physician assisted suicide?
Yes, that's my answer.
Why?
I would also agree.
I feel very strongly that you should always have the choice of dying.
I second that.
I don't know why though. I just it's deep conviction. I have a faith in this idea.
Okay. Like it's like the ultimate form of bodily autonomy, right? I don't know. I don't really see a problem with people like wanting to die, I guess. It's just like it's hard. I think it's hard for like a lot of people to see how chronic depression parallels with people that are like the majority of cases of people seeking physician assisted suicide.
I wonder if there's a need for the cases to be similar though. Like if if depressed people want to die, then I think they should be able to.
Right. So like how severe do you think it has to be though? Cuz like I think most of us would agree that like people with depression, like the most people with depression should not be seeking um physician assisted suicide, right? Because you can argue that they're like not in the right state of mind to um give consent to something like that.
They
I
could.
don't know.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
If
no,
they
you.
want to die, let them die.
I was gonna suggest that I don't know, there could be like a waiting period sort of thing where after about a year or two, if they still hold and like maybe they have to go through a counseling program or something, and if you still want to die at the end of that program and at the end of that time period, then it's up to you.
Yeah. It's hard because on one hand, if you make that waiting period too long, you're just like subjecting them to pain that they really don't need to go through, right? But like on the other hand, I think a lot of people have like the mentality that um psychiatric disorders are like something that you can manage to the point where, or like you'll eventually come to a point where you'll be able to manage it and like function fairly normally. So it's hard to think like you should, like a lot of people want to say that there is going to be hope down the line, so you should just like wait it out instead of taking physician assisted suicide, because like with the average case of depression, like I don't think anybody would agree that, or maybe you do, but like I wouldn't agree that it's okay to let someone with depressive disorder to just like commit suicide because they want to, right?
Why not?
I mean, like someone committing this is so funny because like Tia and I were just gonna talk about suicide prevention, but like the effect that suicide has on like the people in around you and like just everybody that has to hear about it in general is just so sad. And like I don't really think that, I don't know, like in the end it's your bodily autonomy, but I also think there's something morally wrong about killing yourself if you like know the impact you are going to have on other people. But I also don't want to like act like people who commit suicide are doing something morally wrong, because clearly they were in a lot of pain.
That's also like, even if you feel that it's wrong, do you really have the right to make someone wait longer for something? Like that waiting period idea reminded me of like a lot of red states when it comes to abortion.
Yeah.
There's like a waiting period, they give you a bunch of pamphlets like trying to convince you not to do it,
Mhm.
things like that.
So it's like
And
an excuse to like convince them to not do the decision that they
exactly, which is basically what the a waiting period for physician assisted suicide would consist of. So
yeah.
like I can't tell what makes I feel worse about the abortion one, probably because I don't want to commit suicide, but like that's probably just as distressing for people who really want to just end it all, you know?
It's
I definitely would agree that it would be distressing. I just didn't know like if there was any alternative to um, people who like depressed people who wanted to seek physician assisted suicide. I
mhm.
just didn't know if there were like any other options, like other than saying yes, you are allowed to do this, or no, you're not.
Yeah. It's It's really hard. I don't really know what the answer is, but like my gut instinct is to be like, no, don't kill yourself, right?
Well, I
Does
think one thing we can do is just present them options. The first option, you can choose to die. The second option, if based on science research, if you wait a period of X and fully leverage the resources, statistics show that how many people might came out of this shadow. And you're presenting this data, and now the decision is up to you, and you need to evaluate yourself.
Yeah, that's fair, but I also can see how like stats don't really convince people in a lot of cases. Like if you have depression to the point where or like any mental disorder to the point where like you want to kill yourself, I'm like unsure of like whether or not hearing that data is really going to convince you that there's hope because like you really do feel hopeless, so I'm not sure.
I mean, at the individual level, if that motive is really as strong as you have suggested, then probably it's true that and that just let him have the freedom to end his life would be the best because I mean it would be inhuman to ask him to be considerate of others' feeling when he himself is already in such a depression.
I don't know though, like cuz I feel like the impact that suicide can have on like the people around you is like an amount of pain that is comparable to the amount of pain that the person was in before they killed themselves, I would think. So like I'm like having trouble. I don't want to say anything bad about the people that do commit suicide because like for like obvious reasons, but like I don't but also like you're kind of just like passing on that pain, right?
So
I'm not sure a physician has any right to like tell you that what you're doing is morally wrong, but like I also think it would be weird to me to not have that waiting period and to not try to convince them to not kill themselves.
so what about a very special case that people are depressed, are deeply depressed? On one part, because they know that the world around him doesn't care about him, or all the people around him doesn't care about him. So that even if he pass out, nobody would care, and that will also relieve the stress that's buried deep inside. So he would probably make that choice. Do you think in this case that's morally wrong?
It's hard because like I don't consider myself a utilitarian, but like I don't really know how to tell you that it would be okay other than by saying cuz like if it's not going to affect anyone for real, then maybe it's fine. But also you were kind of depriving yourself of the potential to have a better life, right? So maybe it's like not good then either.
I would also think in that case it's probably fine since you aren't actually like hurting anybody and it's like your own decision. And in that case, like I think like it would bring you more happiness to like kill yourself than just to keep on living.
But like you are a person too and isn't killing yourself like harming someone in like the greatest way you could. Like
But like if like when you're super depressed, you have like a happiness like negative happiness level. And then if you like kill yourself, you just have like a zero happiness level because like
right,
you're
so you're
dead.
going from
And
negative to zero, but you could be going but there's like the potential to go from negative to positive, right? I don't know, maybe I'm being stupid.
I mean that's like a uncertainty. I feel like there are a lot of like uncertainties in life that
I,
I
I,
you
I
can't bank on.
both sides of this argument right now. Like, if you are talking about uncertainty, then we are already like imposing an utilitarian attitude, because uncertainty are measured by probability, and you are doing this kind of calculations to calculate its morality.
Yeah, I'm not sure like that's the way to go about it. I just feel like I don't know. My gut tells me that it would be wrong.
If we have the faith that the life is invaluable and it shouldn't be subjected toward any sorts of mathematical calculations, and we shouldn't be applying utilitarian attitude toward calculating the value of life, then I do think that in any case, probably, I mean, suicide will be wrong. That's for sure.
Right. But I also
But
do
it depends on both ways.
yeah, but like I don't know. I feel like all my views are conflicting now because like I do agree with the statement that like everyone should have that bodily autonomy, right? But I don't know. I don't know. It's just
That's why people say like pro freedom and pro responsibility. Sometimes it's really a dichotomy.
yeah,
You can't really balance both.
yeah.
Ultimately, you have to make one choice between pro-choice and pro-responsibility.
It's just you can argue that the very just like wanting to kill yourself is a sign that you are not in a good place due to determine whether or not you should kill yourself. So maybe you don't have bodily autonomy in that situation if you do want to kill yourself.
Does
Get like an outside auditor to determine if you
Well, that's not
would
what I'm saying necessarily. It's just like we don't expect someone who's high to like give their informed consent to something, right? So like why would we give someone who's depressed the choice to kill themselves or not?
But then what if it really is like better for them to kill themselves? How are you going to judge that?
Well, in what case do you think it would be better for someone to kill themselves?
Like if they like if they're really depressed and like they're just miserable all the time, and then by like just not existing, they would be happier.
But then, like, wouldn't that be the case for like everybody that's suicidal though? Like, that's what their mindset is, and like that's why they're suicidal, right? So then, do you think that everyone who is suicidal should kill themselves? Like, no, obviously.
Maybe that's why you need like an outside auditor or someone to like. I know this is getting like pretty dark, but
You're
it
giving like, can anybody have that power over like your body? Like,
what if like they were like theoretically perfect and could always determine whether or not you are going to be happier in the future or whether or not you will stay miserable forever?
I mean, if they were perfect, then fine. But I don't know. It's just hard because like even if you have chronic depression, it'll like eventually for a lot of people it's like eventually better. And like eventually a lot of people see that there is hope. But like if you don't let people get to that point in the first place, then like obviously you can't say whether or not they would have been happier or not, right? Cuz they're dead.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to, like you said, if they were theoretically perfect, then you would agree that that's okay. And like if they were always wrong, then like obviously, like you would never go with that. So like there must be a middle point somewhere where it's okay.
So
Like there has to be some level of accuracy that we think is acceptable.
I think it. So our ultimate, so our argument really hinges on our fundamental philosophy. I would say, if your argument stem from libertarianism, then you would tend to think that, I mean, people's freedom is of utmost importance, and people should be people should be allowed the right to kill themselves without facing any moral judgment. That's what you would argue from a libertarian standpoint. But if we're talking about midpoint, or trying to balance toward all kind of negative or positive impact, then that's definitely from a utilitarian standpoint. If we're talking about probably pro responsibility, if you want to say that this should be your fundamental value, then under any situation you shouldn't be suicidal, because as long as you suicide yourself, it definitely conveys some sort of negative message. And from a social responsibility perspective, you are doing something negative to the society. If you are killing yourself, you're not just doing damage to yourself, you're you also have negative externalities. So it's really under deep. There's an underlying fundamental philosophies behind that, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to mitigate this.
It's also like, I think it's an important discussion to think about, like, whether or not, or like, how do we determine if someone is like okay enough to make that decision in the first place? Like, how would that evaluation work, and like, what would it look like? I don't really know. Because, like, in the end, if you do a psych eval on someone who is, like, severely depressed and wants to kill themselves, then, like, obviously you're gonna come out with the result that, like, they are not mentally stable right now. So, like, how are you gonna let them make a choice like that?
Are we still talking about physician assisted suicide, or like are we talking about suicide overall now?
I think we can't control for, like, suicide overall, so I'm mostly just thinking about physician assisted suicide.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, I'm realizing we are, like, out of time. Does anyone have anything to say? Please do.
Well, for what you have just mentioned, like if someone is really unsavable, I mean, from a if you look at reality, like what how people are dealing with it, it's normally like prevent him from doing it in the public. So I guess that's still people in general are still looking toward this issue from utilitarianism. Like if someone want to commit suicide in the public, normally that would trigger response from the police, from the fire brigade, or whatever. The government will try to prevent him from doing it in public. That's what normally happens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in reality, that's how people in general look toward it. Probably.
Yeah. I guess I'm just asking, like, how far does freedom go really? Like, people that are not stable don't really have the power to make decisions like that, or, like, shouldn't really have the power to make decisions like that. So, I don't see how we would grant. I don't know.
Do it with the auditor.
Who would it be, though?
How's an auditor supposed to know how you feel?
Yeah.
No, you can train them.
Wait, what?
Looking for them.
If the need exists, they'll find a way.
Well, the need does exist. Should we let people with depression seek physician-assisted suicide?
Honest, I think like the term informed consent is also is also kind of, I mean, if you really want to think about fundamental freedom, you shouldn't like impose a universal standard of informed consent on everyone. It should really be subjectively determined.
How would we do that?
Not like I don't think like using informed consent when you are talking about freedom is very a good choice maybe.
But like in like practice, if we're trying to like you need informed consent for assisted suicide, right? Like that's just like the way it has to be because like how do you know if the doctor is just like not gonna just kill people, right? You need that informed consent. So like to get that informed consent though, like the standard is that we don't get consent from people that are not able to give like a good response that they would have if they were stable. So like I guess I'm just asking like how does that make sense for like any case of physician assisted suicide, not just like depression, like I don't know. We can talk about this some other time. Ah, so announcements. We only have 2 more meetings left after this one. So like next week is the experience machine and like what does it mean to live well? So like it's gonna touch on a lot of this same similar ish concepts as like what we are like just talking about, which will be fun. And then after that, we're gonna have a Netflix party. I don't really know what we're gonna watch though, so you guys should suggest things. And maybe we should like vote on it because I feel like I don't know. Does anybody have any ideas? It doesn't have to be anything deep. It can just be like a Christmas movie if you guys want.
Iron Man.
Oh,
Oh, Iron Man 3. That's a Christmas
Godzilla.
movie.
I don't think. I think a movie would be better. Like watching series is probably don't get for.
Yeah. We just watched Iron Man. Why would we watch it again?
No, Iron Man 3. It's a Christmas movie.
Oh. Okay, we'll see. Okay, so before you guys go today, can you fill out this survey? I'm gonna put the link in the chat so you don't have to type it in yourself.
Oh, it's not a link.
Ah, sorry.
Okay.
Copy and paste it. I don't know why you're complaining.
So what about we choose a theme, then we recommend movies based on that theme, or I guess like each one will recommend totally different movies, and really doesn't make sense. Yeah.
We'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah,
But
like whatever.
we wanted to let you guys know after this whole lovely conversation about suicide, like in real life we should be trying to prevent it. And the
Yeah, you
university
guys know that. I don't want to send any message that implies otherwise. Like clearly we should prevent it.
yeah. But there is an out of darkness walk for suicide prevention. Is that just for U of M students?
I actually don't know how it's working this semester because it's like it is U of M out of darkness, but like it's a virtual walk, and I also think like people in Ann Arbor just like come to it even if they aren't students.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not completely sure, but um if you guys click on the link, you can donate there. And if you are a U of M student, I know for sure that you can join the team, so like do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's with the American Society for Suicide Prevention, which is super cool. They like do a lot of interesting and good things, and they're also partners with the Crisis Text Line, which is also very good.
Also, we might change our meeting time for next semester. We'll be sending a when to meet soonish, probably.
Yeah, we can send it out like in the beginning of next year, just so everyone like knows what their schedule looks like. It'll probably be around this time, but maybe a different day of the week.
All right. Do you have anything else?
I don't think so. Wait, I lost my thing. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that's it for today. So please donate at the link that I sent out, and next meeting, same time next week.
See you guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Contest to see who leaves last. Whoever leaves last is the loser.
You mean the winner?
It's my meeting, so I could just end it for all of you guys right now.
Just like a 4 times loser then.
That one was pretty. That meeting went pretty well, I guess.
There's no one.
Yeah. So bad that Mustafa did not show up.
Yeah, I still think my auditor idea is a good idea.
Your other idea doesn't make any sense.
What do you mean? It makes perfect sense.
For it to be.
You just need to find some way to like determine the future happiness, which you can probably do like statistically or with like AI or something.